Richard Dawkins claims that God is a delusion and that religious faith is the root of all evil. But what if the scientific evidence is telling a different story? Over the past 50 years, scientists have made a series of remarkable discoveries which show that the universe we live in is a very unlikely place. The universe is precisely adjusted to make our lives possible. Scientists call this cosmic fine-tuning. And at least some of them are now admitting that this points to the universe being deliberately designed as a place for us to live. Could this be genuinely new evidence for a God who created us? We've brought together a lineup of experts to help answer this question. Here in the ancient city of Durham, we talk to David Wilkinson. He's the principal of St. John's College. He's also a scientist who studied how stars and galaxies are formed.
I'm not the type of child who built a telescope at the age of 4 or anything like that. It took me a long time to get into science. I was pretty good at mathematics at school, and then when it came to choosing university, I took the easy option and thought, well, physics wouldn't require a great deal of work. It allowed me plenty of time to play cricket. But what happened at university was that just before coming up to university, I became a Christian. I also found myself with this new degree in physics, and the first 2 courses that were taught in those days were quantum theory and relativity. Those were the first 2 things. This was very, very different from the kind of stuff that I'd done at school. And I began to get excited with some of the big questions in physics and cosmology, alongside my own Christian faith beginning to emerge. And the two questioned each other, enriched each other. And part of my fascination in cosmology is the big questions that physics poses. But it's also the sense that here physics and science were beginning to tell me something of what this creator God had actually made. And therefore had a value in itself because of that. And over years then, as I moved into research in astrophysics, those things have always enriched each other.
Here in the world-famous University of Cambridge, John Polkinghorne was Professor of Mathematical Physics. He gave this up to become a minister in the Church of England, and then later he came back to Cambridge, where he became the president of Queen's College.
I very much enjoyed being a theoretical physicist, and I thought of it as being a sort of Christian vocation, to use such talents as I had. But unfortunately, in these mathematically based subjects, you don't get better as you get older. You don't do your best work before you're 25 usually, but almost certainly by 45 you've made most of the contribution you can. So after 25 years in theoretical physics, I thought I'd done my bit for the subject and I'd do something else. And because Christianity has always been central to my life, the idea of seeking ordination seemed the right next step.
Also in Cambridge, Rodney Holder is course director with the Faraday Institute at St Edmund's College. He's been both an astrophysicist and a vicar.
Well, I started by reading mathematics here in Cambridge and then moved to Oxford to do a doctorate and a couple of years postdoctoral research in astrophysics. I had a wonderful supervisor, Dennis Sharma, who had been an inspiration lecturing in mathematics in Cambridge in such areas as general relativity and so on, and cosmology. So I moved to study under him when he moved to Oxford, and I was studying a very rather specialised problem to do with galaxies and the later stages of galaxy evolution, the accretion of intergalactic gas by our own galaxy in particular.
The port of Southampton is world famous as the home of the great cruise liners, and this is where we found philosopher and writer Peter Williams.
My name is Peter Williams, and I'm a Christian philosopher, working a lot of my time with a Christian educational charity called the Damaris Trust, through whom I spend quite a lot of my time working with A-level students in schools around the country, doing conferences on philosophy and ethics and spirituality. I'm also an author for various websites and publishers, and my most recent book was called A Skeptic's Guide to Atheism, which is a response to the New Atheist movement.
Here at Southampton University, Graham Swinerd is a space scientist. He talks about how this new evidence played a part in his journey to faith.
Yeah, I've been working in spacecraft engineering, both in industry and at university, for some years now. So currently working in this School of Engineering Sciences here at the University of Southampton, where I teach spacecraft design and spacecraft engineering. My research interests wide, but more recently focused on the problems of orbital debris. When we operate in space, we leave junk in orbit, basically. And those pieces of junk are not like pieces of junk you find on the floor, which are static. They're moving around at about 7 or 8 kilometers per second. So it becomes a problem because they can intersect other spacecraft orbits and cause damage to people and hardware.
So what do scientists mean when they say the universe is just right for us, or the impression of design is overwhelming? Probably the most famous scientist in the world today is Stephen Hawking. He puts it like this: the laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Next time, our experts will give us some specific examples of cosmic fine-tuning. The universe is a very unlikely place. The values of some basic physical constants have been precisely adjusted to make our lives possible. Tiny changes in these values would mean that we couldn't be here at all. Is this genuinely new evidence pointing to a God who created the universe? Why are things so finely balanced to make possible life on a razor's edge? But what do scientists mean when they talk about cosmic fine-tuning?
It turns out, and this is a very surprising, unexpected discovery, that the laws of physics, the basic given fabric of the world, had to be very specific, very finely tuned, as we sometimes say, for the possibility of carbon-based life appearing at all. It's a very surprising conclusion. But it's true, and all scientists will acknowledge that's the case.
Suppose we had a machine that could generate universes. We'd have to decide what laws of physics we wanted to give our universe and make sure we had one dial for every law of physics we wanted to give our universe on our universe generating machine. But we'd also have to tune the relative strengths or weaknesses of those different laws. So, for example, if we wanted to give our universe a law of gravity, we'd want to say, well, how strong would we want our law of gravity to be, and so on. Well, if we took a machine that was set up to represent the laws of physics that actually exist in our universe, one dial for every law that we actually have and all the strengths the way that they actually are, but we took just one of those dials and changed it just a minute percentage, then we pressed the produce a universe button. What would be produced? Well, scientists have been astonished to discover, running the numbers as it were, that what would be produced then would be a universe that was lifeless and dull and uninteresting.
The Big Bang is currently accepted in the scientific community, and the initial conditions, if you think about it, if you have an expansion like I don't know, you can imagine this Big Bang, all the energy and mass going out, and there's an amount of gravity which will slow it down. And so if you have like say too much mass at the beginning, too much mass and energy at the beginning, then the expansion takes place, but it contracts again too quickly, and you wouldn't actually have the formation of stars and galaxies. On the other hand, if there was a bit less mass, then the expansion would be so rapid that stars and galaxies wouldn't condense. And it's amazing because the initial conditions which actually are required in order for us to be here, if you change those by 1 part in a million billion, and that's what I call fine-tuning, then we wouldn't be here.
A very simple and central example is the question of where does carbon come from. The very early universe doesn't make any carbon. It's very simple, it only makes simple things. Hydrogen and helium, and they're pretty boring in terms of chemistry. Now, where does carbon come from? There's only one place in the whole universe where carbon is made, and it's in the interior nuclear furnaces of the stars. We are people of stardust, made of the ashes of dead stars. And it turns out that the process by which carbon is made inside the stars is an extraordinarily delicate process. In fact, it looks at first sight as though it couldn't happen at all. It's only possible because there's a very large enhancement effect called a resonance in the trade, which makes it go much quicker than we might have expected. And that resonance is there because the laws of nuclear physics take a very specific form. If they were a little bit different, either there would be no resonance or it would be in the wrong place at the wrong energy. That's a very striking example of how finely tuned the universe has to be for us to be inhabitants of it.
I can give you one of the most famous examples of that, if you like, and that's due to Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist astrophysicist. Interesting background to Fred Hoyle, because originally he was opposed to the Big Bang because he thought it meant that the universe had an origin, and if it had an origin in time, you might need a god to make it. Now, theologians are, more blasé about that, but Hoyle, as an atheist, was really troubled by that, and he proposed the steady state theory instead, which was eventually overthrown. And the Big Bang reigns supreme. But Hoyle did some really, really important work on how the chemical elements of which the stars, of the planets, and ultimately us, of what are made. And he discovered that you need a very, very fine balance of the forces in nature in order to make carbon inside stars, which is essential for life, and in order to make oxygen without destroying all the carbon in the process. So two seeming coincidences necessary in order to get the materials for life. And when Hoyle made that discovery, he was moved to remark that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and with all of chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. It's a put-up job, it was the kind of way he expressed it. He was deeply impressed by this, and here you have an atheist, a man who called religion an illusion, and he said that in books and on TV programs in the early 50s and so on. Here's a man who, with that kind of background, talked about a super intellect monkeying with physics.
Scientists discovered the first examples of cosmic fine-tuning back in the 1950s and 60s. Today, they know of many more examples, and some of these have to be very precisely tuned. Life really is balanced on a razor's edge.
Now, most of us know that the orbit of the Earth is just in the right place. If it was slightly closer to the Sun, it would be too hot for life to exist. If it was just slightly further away from the sun, it would be too cold for life to exist. And we know that by looking at Mars and seeing that actually life, if it did develop at a very primitive level, didn't go forward in the way that life on Earth has. Now that's a circumstance. It means that the orbit of the Earth is just right, as Goldilocks would have said, for life to develop. But when you look at the universe as a whole, you see embedded in the laws themselves this Goldilocks enigma, as Paul Davies says. The fact that the universe is just right for the development of intelligent life. And it's not just right, it's extraordinarily just right. One of the things about cosmic fine-tuning is not just that it's fine-tuned, but it's fine-tuned to the most extraordinary degree. And as you look around, for instance, in the energy levels of carbon or oxygen, which make possible the fact that there's lots of carbon in the universe, and that's important for us because we're made of the stuff, or in the balances in the early universe embedded in the physical constants, there is an extraordinary fine-tuning which makes possible life. And for many of us, whether we have religious faith or not, this raises a question of what is going on. Is there a deeper story to the universe, or is there an explanation for this cosmic fine-tuning?
So is there a deeper story? Does cosmic fine-tuning tell us that the universe has been deliberately designed for life? Is it a pointer to God? Some scientists are deeply uncomfortable with this conclusion, and they look for ways out from it. Next time we'll start examining these ways out. The magazine New Scientist says the universe we live in seems to be a very unlikely place. It goes on to ask, are we just lucky, or is there some deep significance to the fact that we live in a universe just right for us? So does cosmic fine-tuning point towards a creator God, or is it a coincidence? Are we just lucky? Go into a car park. Any particular number plate you see is a very unlikely combination of letters and numbers. But it doesn't need an explanation. The car has to have some number plate.
When we feel we need explanation, we're not simply concerned with something that's very rare and only occasionally happens. If you went into a car park and saw a number plate with HRH1 on it, you wouldn't think that's just a random thing. You would think there must be some further significance attached to that nameplate. And so it's a question of not only rare events, but rare events that seem to carry particular meaning. Now, of course, our universe might have all sorts of different laws of nature. When we see the ones we've actually got have this amazing consequence of the richness and diversity of carbon-based life, that seems to me to be something that you shouldn't just shrug off and say, well, we're here because we're here, just a happy accident, that sort of thing. It does seem to demand an explanation. And I think most people who thought about these things would think that's the case. Though, of course, not everybody would agree what the right explanation is.
Stand on a railway station. The combination of people there is very unlikely, but it doesn't need an explanation.
The fact that these fine-tuning of constants is just so amazing that we find ourselves wanting to ask the question, is there a deeper story? We've got to be careful about taking the question into proof, but I think it's of such an interesting and surprising level of detail that we find ourselves saying, let's talk about the deeper story.
That's right in one sense, that any particular combination of constants and so on is highly, highly improbable. But the combination that we actually see is highly significant. And I think what you should be looking at is the number of combinations, so to speak, of constants and initial conditions that are significant in that way in giving rise to life, compared with the possible range of values of constants. And if you do that kind of sum, you get a probability of things turning out right, which are more like zero, actually. And indeed, one of the early papers of Stephen Hawking on that literally put a figure of zero on this probability for things turning out just right, for the universe being just right for life. And there is a very good explanation for why that should be, in terms of a theistic explanation, that we can explain why that should be. Suppose I had a pack of cards here now and just dealt them. I shuffled them, very carefully shuffled them, and then dealt them. And it came out ace of clubs, two of clubs, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of clubs. Same in diamonds, hearts, spades. Well, you could think, well, the chances of that 1 in 10 to the power 60, actually, interestingly enough, or something along those lines. But if you knew beforehand that I was, some kind of conjurer or magician, you'd think there's a better explanation for that than it's just a random throw of the pack of cards, a random deal.
Some people will indeed say, well, look, any combination of laws in the universe is going to be just as unlikely perhaps as any other. Just because something is unlikely, that doesn't mean that therefore you have to appeal to design in order to explain it. And that's correct insofar as it goes, but it doesn't go very far. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose I took your bank card and I put it into a hole-in-the-wall machine and I punched in a 4-digit number to the machine and then accessed your bank records. Well, I think you'd be rather surprised and annoyed at me, but if you raised an objection and sort of said, well, how did you get hold of my PIN number? Well, would you be particularly impressed if I said to you, look, any 4-digit number that I punched into this machine is just as improbable as any other. They're all one 4-digit arrangement of numbers out of a huge pool of possible 4-digit numbers. So there's nothing here to be surprised at, nothing here for you to think needs explaining in terms of me having designs upon your bank account. Well, no, it's not just that I've punched in a particular unlikely arrangement of numbers, but this arrangement of numbers is specified as the only number that happens to access your bank account. Now, the fine-tuning of the universe is like that. It's not just that it's a complex, unlikely arrangement of laws, but it's that the complex, unlikely arrangement of laws that exists happens to be the one that allows life to exist, out of a huge possible number of arrangements of laws, most of which would not allow life to exist. So it's this combination of unlikeliness, of complexity, with an independently given specification that in everyday situations like that bank card situation tips us off to design, and I think should do the same in the instance of looking at the fine-tuning of the universe.
So cosmic fine-tuning, the particular combination of laws and numbers in the universe, isn't just very unlikely. It's very unlikely in a specific way, a way that makes complexity possible, that makes life possible, that makes us possible. It isn't just a coincidence. We aren't just lucky. There is something that needs explaining. But this isn't the whole story, because if the numbers weren't just right, we couldn't be here. Next time, we'll ask whether the only kind of universe we can possibly see is one where the numbers are just right for us. We can't live without water, so it's no surprise that there's so much water on Earth. If there wasn't, we couldn't be here. The only kind of place we can live is one that's wet. In the same way, the only kind of universe we can live in is one that's fine-tuned for life. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that the universe we see is right for us. The only kind of universe we could possibly live in is one that's fine-tuned for life. But is this enough to explain the fine-tuning?
Well, it's of course true to say that the only kind of universe that we could be looking at would be one that's compatible with our existence. There's a sense, therefore, in which we shouldn't be surprised that we look out into the universe and we see a universe that allows us to exist. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be surprised that such a universe does exist, or think that there's nothing to explain here. I think the philosopher John Leslie gives a very useful analogy for this. He tells the story of a man who's arraigned before a firing squad. And the commander of the firing squad says, present arms, fire, bullets fly through the air, hit the wall all around the guy who's been arraigned before this firing squad, but none of the bullets hit him. Well, he's quite surprised to have survived the firing squad, and says to the commandant, what's going on? Is this a set-up job? Is this some sort of practical joke? And the commandant of the firing squad says, I don't know what you're so surprised at. After all, if any of the bullets had hit you, you wouldn't be alive now to be surprised at the fact that all the bullets missed you. So, case closed, nothing to explain. But of course, there is something fishy about that situation, as even people like Richard Dawkins, he mentions this analogy in his book, The God Delusion, and he says that yes, the guy should be surprised that he is still alive. Let me put it this way. Just because the man wouldn't be alive now were it not for the previous occurrence of this unlikely set of circumstances, doesn't mean that the occurrence of that unlikely set of circumstances was not unlikely or something that needs explaining.
It's certainly true that we couldn't be in a universe which was different in the kinds of ways I've been describing from this one, but it doesn't answer the question as to why this particular one exists with these particular parameters and why we're here to observe it. So I think it's still related to the pack of cards or the firing squad. I wouldn't be here unless the parameters had turned out right.
Perhaps one day scientists will discover a theory of everything which explains why the universe has to be the way it is.
A way of getting another sort of explanation, I think, that would be better than the one you just offered, if I may be so bold, is to say, well, maybe things couldn't be any different. Maybe these cosmologists are wrong in saying that the constants of physics could take on other values, or the initial conditions could be different, or if they were different, things would turn out vastly differently. maybe there's only one self-consistent set of laws of physics. In which case, well, if a universe is going to exist, then it's going to be this one, if you like, or one with these same laws. And so, in that sense, life is inevitable.
For space scientist Graham Swinerd, the theory of everything isn't a convincing explanation of fine-tuning.
When Stephen Hawking published his book, A Brief History of Time, he said in that, I think, if I remember rightly, that, I'm sure he'll forgive me if I've got it wrong, but he said in that, you know, in a few years' time we'd have a theory of everything. And I thought at the time it was a bit naive, really. But anyway, and as time has turned out, as the decades have gone on since the publication of that book, it turns out that maybe we're not quite there. We haven't got a theory of everything. And another thing about the theory of everything, or the scientific theories that we have at the moment, is that when we understand a great deal about the universe, but what comes out, we have to kind of input the numbers in order to make the theories work. The current theories don't tell us why, for example, this fine-tuning takes place with nuclear reactions in the sun, or why the initial conditions of the Big Bang are the way they are. So, okay, if it happens, it maybe happen, I don't know, centuries away or something, or I don't really think it's going to happen in my lifetime.
But it also goes against the grain of the whole argument, the way it's been in cosmology, really, of tweaking the numbers. And people are looking for a unique theory, but time and again they've been driven away from that to realise that actually they're not getting that much closer in the end. The more fundamental theories we get, we're still left with lots of free parameters that seem to need to be chosen.
Even if scientists do discover a theory of everything, this won't explain why the laws which have to exist happen to make the universe just right for us. That would still be a remarkable coincidence. So the theory of everything may just push the question up a level. But
it would still also, I think, that answer leave you with a very, very big surprise, that if the only possible set of laws of physics that it could be instantiated were instantiated, that set of laws would give rise to an interesting universe with stars and galaxies and life.
A lot of people will try and provide an explanation to this Goldilocks enigma by saying it has to be like this, or we wouldn't be here to see it. Now, what's implied behind that is that in other universes where the constants were different, we wouldn't be there to see it. And it's a fair point. However, we need to be careful that at the moment, this idea of many universes is speculation.
The fact that we're here isn't enough to explain why the universe is just right for us. Unless there really are many universes, and we just happen to have struck lucky. Next time we'll explore the alternatives: God or the multiverse. If you go into a clothing store, you don't think it's strange to find something that fits you. If there are enough different sizes, something is bound to be just right. We live in a universe that's just right. Is this because it's been designed for us? Or are there a huge number of universes and one of them is bound to fit? God or the multiverse?
Somebody who writes about these things, and I found very helpful, is a philosopher called John Leslie. He tells a story about an execution. You are about to be shot, your eyes are bandaged, there are 50 highly trained marksmen pointing rifles at your chest, the shots ring out, you find you have survived. Now, of course, what do? Do you just stroll away saying, gee, that was a close one? Of course, if you hadn't survived, you wouldn't be in a position to say anything at all. But it's so remarkable a fact that you survived the execution that surely the only rational thing is to say, well, maybe more was going on there than I realized. And so Leslie suggests there are really only two possible general explanations of your good fortune. One is maybe there are just lots and lots and lots of executions taking place today. And of course, even the best of marksmen occasionally miss. You happen to be in the one where they all miss. Now, of course, there had to be a lot of executions taking place today, but at least it's a rational possibility. But there's another rational possibility, which is that maybe there's only one execution today, namely yours, but more was going on in that than you were aware of. The marksmen were on your side, and they missed by design. Now, that charming story, that parable, if you like, translates into thinking about the fine-tuning the universe. On the one hand, you could say, well, maybe there are just trillions and trillions and trillions of different universes, the multiverse, as people say, and we just happen to be the one which is suitable for carbon-based life. But the other possibility is that maybe there's only one universe, which the way it is, not because it's not any old world, but it's a creation which has been endowed by its creator with the finely tuned laws that will make its history fruitful.
So, God or the multiverse? The biggest problem for the multiverse is that there isn't any evidence for other universes.
In the various ways that are conceived of these many universes existing, it's the case that they are unobservable in principle. The only universe we can observe is this one. These other universes cannot be observed even in principle.
One problem is this. Sure, you could say if there were many different universes, all with different tunings, then it wouldn't be too unlikely that our particularly fine-tuned universe exists. But for this objection to carry through, the objector actually needs to assume that it's true that there are all of these different universes. And is there any independent evidence that such universes exist? It doesn't seem to me the case that there is. I mean, sure, if you had enough monkeys typing at enough typewriters, then they could produce the works of William Shakespeare just by luck. But nobody looks at the work of William Shakespeare and goes, there must be a lot of monkeys with typewriters somewhere. In the absence of independent evidence that there is a whole typing pool of monkeys working away, everyone knows that the most rational explanation of the specified complexity of a text like Shakespeare's work is that there was a single designer who produced it intentionally. And the same thing goes for our universe.
There are some theories of physics which explain our early universe, which imply the existence of many universes. But we've no hard evidence that many universes are there. In order to have the hard evidence, we'd have to pass information from one universe to another, and we don't have that at the moment. So at the moment that's a philosophical suggestion, it's a metaphysical suggestion for me, rather than being a scientific account.
The multiverse doctrine is a very extravagant suggestion. It postulates the existence of all these trillions and trillions of universe, all unobservable by us, all different in their characters, and so very different that by chance one of them turns out to be okay for carbon-based life. Now that's a very bold speculation, and it's certainly not a scientific theory. It's a metaphysical guess, as we might say. It goes beyond physics into some sort of philosophy, as of course does the idea that the universe is a creation in the same sort of way.
What if tomorrow scientists do discover evidence for a multiverse? Apparently this wouldn't necessarily account for the fine-tuning. Even an infinite number of universes doesn't guarantee that one of them will be just right for us.
Actually, even that wouldn't necessarily solve the fine-tuning problem. Simply by having a large, or indeed an infinite array of universes, you couldn't be sure you'd get one that was right for life. I mean, For example, there are an infinite number of even numbers, but never in that collection will you find a number with a property of oddness. So it's not clear that having an infinite collection means you've got everything you might want.
So does cosmic fine-tuning point towards a creator, a God? For some scientists, this is an unwelcome conclusion. Is this why they prefer to believe in the multiverse, even without any evidence? For John Polkinghorne, the multiverse only explains the fine-tuning, but believing in a creator God explains a range of other things as well.
But I think that the multiverse is, first of all, a very uneconomic assumption to make. And secondly, it seems to me it only does one piece of explanatory work. It explains, or it explains away, the fine-tuning of our universe by saying we're just the winning ticket in the cosmic lottery. But I believe seeing the universe as a divine creation does lots of pieces of explanatory work. It not only explains the fine-tuning, explains why the universe is rationally beautiful with wonderful laws of nature. It explains our widely attested human experience of encounter with the sacred reality of God and so on. So there's a cumulative case for seeing the universe as a creation, which doesn't seem to me to have a counterpart on the multiverse side of the argument.
God or the multiverse? There isn't any evidence for the multiverse, and even if scientists do discover such evidence, it can't necessarily account for the fine-tuning. It seems as if one of the main reasons scientists choose to believe in the multiverse is to avoid having to believe in a creator. On the other hand, our experts agree that cosmic fine-tuning isn't a knockdown proof that God exists, but it is a clear pointer towards God's reality. Belief in such a creator can explain many other aspects of our lives, as well as fine-tuning. When we take it with other kinds of evidence, fine-tuning can form part of a cumulative case for God's reality. We'll come back to this in the final program in this series.